Welcome back to this week's edition of Impactful Teamwork. My name's Julia Felton, and I'm your host and guide for the next 15, 20 minutes. And today's topic has been inspired by today's date, 22nd of September. And this is a really pivotal date in the year because this is the start of the autumn equinox. And the autumn equinox is all about renewal and rebirth and relinquishing what doesn't work for us and harnessing what does. So it's part of the seasons, which is what we talk about a lot here on the podcast, of how we can leverage nature's wisdom in order to make our businesses more effective. So what I thought would be a great topic, therefore, for us to talk about today is the topic of reinvention. Because this is so critical in business right now. Everything is changing at a rapid pace, and therefore there is a need for us to continually change and evolve in order to meet the new situations that we find ourselves in. I think we can all agree that right now the world feels in chaos. I don't know about you, every time I turn on the news, there is some new drama going on in the world. And there's a lot of unrest and upheaval going on where the masses aren't feeling they're being listened to. And I think we're seeing a fundamental change happening in world economies, world structures. What we know from some of the work from people like Buckminster Fuller is that we can't make a change with the existing systems. We need to come up with something completely new. And I think that's what we're seeing happen right now. Something completely new emerging and growing. And anything that means that we're going through growing pains, not just individually within our businesses, but also within the world. Let's talk about how do we start reinventing our businesses before it's too late. As I said, all businesses ultimately face the unpleasant reality that they're going to have to reinvent. And if we just think about a product life cycle, we know that most products go through a bell curve. They have a period of adoption, maybe then rapid growth, then they get to the top of the curve. And unless something's done, the business then drops into decline. So what we need to do is when we get to that growth stage, is move to a next curve and create what we call multiple S curves. As you can see, hopefully, as you can see as I'm drawing this, you have an S curve and then another S curve. Because if we don't do that, the potential consequences for the organization are very dire. And actually, there was some research done by Matthew Paulson and Derek Van Beaver. And in their book, Stall Points, they talk about once a company runs up against a major stall in its growth, it has less than a 10% chance of ever fully recovering. So just think about that. Once a company gets to that kind of growth point and it's accelerating and it's going into maturity, if it hasn't really thought about the next thing it wants to do, the chances are it'll fall into decline and then it has a less than 10% chance of recovery. So those odds are pretty daunting, I think you can agree. And it probably explains why about 2/3 of stalled companies are later acquired and taken private or forced into bankruptcy. And so why does this happen? There's no shortage of explanations for why companies stall. And it can be from a failure to stick with the core. So sticking to its core business for too long in a market that is rapidly changing. It could be to do with problems with execution or misreading our consumers' tastes. Or sometimes we see businesses stall because actually they focus too much on scaling just for the sake of scaling. But what's common to all of these assumptions as to why companies stall is that they stall from a failure to fix what's clearly broken within the company. So why is this a problem? The problem is that often, if companies do get round to fixing what is broken, they wait way too long. And this becomes a problem because, as I said, then they drop into that 10% of companies that never recover. So there was some research done by Accenture that found that companies that successfully reinvented themselves had one trait in common. And I'd like to share this with you and explain a little bit about it today, because I think this really talks into the topic of reinvention, repositioning the business. So the companies that tend to be successful broaden their focus beyond the financial S curve and manage three much shorter but vitally important hidden S curves. And these three are tracking the basis of competition in their industry, renewing their capabilities, and nurturing the ready supply of talent. So, a commitment to reinvent doesn't often come naturally to businesses, because I think the thing is that when things look the best, right? When business looks the brightest, looks the rosiest, it's almost at that point that actually we're a bit too late to reinvent. We need to have actually been reinventing before we got to our best times. This misnomer that when things get really great, then we'll take a back seat is actually really misplaced, because actually, as things begin to get better, that's the time we need to dig in and take action and help jump the business to the next S curve. So let's just talk about the hidden competition curve. And we've seen this in multiple industries, right? In the mobile phone industry, everything changed. And in the early days, it was all about price and network coverage. They were the main things that consumers worried about. And then it became value of service, design, branding, applications. So it's how do we see these changes happening in the marketplace before they happen? And of course, Netflix is such a great example of that, where it radically altered the basis of competition in the DVD market by introducing the business model that delivered by mail. In the old days, you used to go to your Blockbuster video store, you'd get the video off the shelf, take it home, watch it, and then you've got to remember to take it back. Whereas Netflix altered that by going to a postal service for that. But then, of course, they then moved into the digital space. And today, Netflix is the largest provider of streaming over the internet, videos, programs. They've also become a TV media giant, commissioning their own programs. So they've totally changed their business model in order to accommodate the changing needs of people. And one of the things that we've got to remember when we're in business is that we've always got to look outside of the box, because often competition comes from where we least expect it. So if we think about the music industry, for example, all the music executives with their records and then their CDs trying to refine the business, but actually remember, it was Apple, a PC manufacturer or a technology manufacturer, that actually changed the game by when it created the iPod, where you could put all those songs in your pocket. So that totally disrupted the music industry and how it worked. So let's talk about the second S curve, which is the hidden talent curve. So what Accenture research noticed was that companies often lose focus on developing and retaining their people, and people with the capability and will to drive new business growth. Because as business improves, companies often think that they can get a bit leaner. There maybe as the business grows, actually, ironically, they become under a bit more pressure to boost margins. So they reduce the headcount and investment in talent. And what that has is the effect of often driving away the very people that could help businesses reinvent themselves. So, what high performing companies need are new and upcomers who can grow a new business, not just manage an old one. And for that reason, it's also important that the business ends up having the right CEO at the helm at the right time. Because let's face it, some CEOs are naturally what we call more game changing. They're better at coming up with new ideas. Other CEOs are much better at managing the finances of the business, about doing turnarounds. If we're going to actually help companies jump the S curve, that often requires a frequent injection of new blood and a continual shakeup of the top team. And that's pretty counterintuitive to what we usually think about in business. But I do think it's really important to have the right leader in place at the right time of the business growth. Because typically, if we think about a business, at the outset, we want a leader who's great at ideas. They're what we call game changing leaders. As those ideas get more cemented, we need a strategist to lead the business to put the ideas into plans and structures. Then we maybe need a leader that's a bit more one that is more focused on execution to get everything working. And then maybe we also need a leader that's looking at the continual improvement and enhancements of the business. And I know from personal experience how important this is. And if you don't have the right leader at the helm at the right time, how it can have a massive impact on the business. So let me share with you my personal experience, because when I was leading my data analytics business unit in London, I was brought into that role. And of course, I didn't know any of this at the time. But what I realized was when I was brought into the role, I was actually great at coming up with ideas and creating new concepts. So I was brought in to create data metrics across the hospitality industry originally in Europe. So what does that mean? I had to come up with the ideas, how to create the systems, how to create the technology to do that, how to put all the processes and systems in place in order to create that business. And I was really great at doing that. And fast forward a few years when we were actually the market leader and the business had moved into a more mature phase. I actually stopped from being what I would term the golden girl in the company, and they gave me extra coaching and I couldn't quite understand what was going on. And it was only years after I really understood. But what had happened was the business needed a different type of leader in that maturity stage. It needed a leader who was a lot more detailed focused than me, who was potentially a lot more people focused than me in terms of nurturing and coaching the team. At that time, I didn't have those skills. And what I realized was that in order for me to keep engaged in the business, I had started putting my time and attention, rather than managing the existing business, on trying to find ways of expanding the business into new verticals, such as health clubs. And then we started looking at gaming and a number of other verticals. I can absolutely see from my own experience how it's so important to have the right people in the right place at the right time in order to meet the needs of the business. And I think the other thing to remember is that our business reinvention requires not just nimble top teams, but also a large number of team members ready to take on the considerable challenge of getting businesses off the ground and making them thrive. So if you think about it, every time we go through an S curve, it's almost like launching a new business. And of course, that can be challenging. We have to run the existing business whilst also growing and starting the new business. So that actually means that we need to have team members in place that are really nimble and versatile at being able to do that. And some of you might remember on a podcast a couple of weeks ago, I was actually talking about the power of soft skills and how important they were in the workplace. And I was really inspired by something I actually read today that also prompted this edition of the podcast, which was from the DeepMind CEO, who is the head AI person at Google. And he was talking to a bunch of students. His name is Dennis Hassabis. And he said the top skill for students to learn right now is learning how to learn rather than learning specific skills. Because what he talked about was AI is changing week by week. And so it's making traditional skill sets obsolete faster than ever. So he talked about learning how to learn is the most crucial skill for the upcoming generation. The AI innovation pace makes traditional learning paths unreliable. And we only have to think about it. We send our children to university and they go in year one to learn something. And by year three, often that skill is obsolete or has materially changed. So it means that students need to develop meta skills, this adaptability, self-directed learning, critical thinking in order to be successful. And we talked all about that on that podcast that we did a couple of weeks ago. And he also said that the fact that what's going to make this even more critical is the fact that AI is going to become more human-like over the next decade. So right now, where AI is just great at doing one specific task, it might start being able to do a lot more. So it's really important, therefore, that we have these, he calls them meta skills. I think that's a much better term than soft skills, meta skills in order to survive. So, what does learning to learn actually mean? He said it's all about understanding your own learning style and preferences. And we know that everyone has different learning styles and preferences. Some people like to learn visually, some auditory, some kinesthetically, some like a mix of everything. We do know that generally people learn better when they do things experientially. Hence the reason I run my experiential retreats with horses to help leaders develop leadership and teamwork skills. Learning to learn also means being able to pick up new skills effectively and across multiple disciplines. It's also now about connecting ideas between different fields because, as we saw in that example of Apple taking over the whole music world, what happens in one sphere, we can actually mirror somewhere else. So this is all about thinking outside the box and seeing those connections and joining the dots between different things. Learning to learn is also about continually adapting in your career. And it's enjoying this interdisciplinary thinking and experimentation. And what he talks about in this keynote speech that he gave was that traditional curriculums focus on memorizing facts and specific skills, whereas actually what we need is a restructuring towards helping team members and students learn how to learn and get this adaptability, because jobs will change in the future more frequently. Workers who have rigid single domain expertise will be more vulnerable than those that can pivot across fields. And that's actually why we're finding that generalized skills are actually becoming in demand nowadays. So people that can elevate themselves out of the detail to see this bigger picture and how things can join together. So there's a massive reinvention, therefore, coming on in your team members and what they're going to be doing within the job, which I think is really important. And I think it's really important as we talk about that we ensure that within these roles of our team members, that we give them time to grow. We also give them time to stop and reflect and maybe even adopt some of the principles that Google have had about giving people time to work on pet projects. So Google allow people time each week to work on a passion project. And that's one of the ways that they've been able to come up with a number of new inventions, such as Gmail. So that's just an example of how reinvention happens in different areas of the organizations. So in the face of all the challenges going on in business right now, I believe that companies that manage themselves according to the three hidden S curves, the basis of competition, the distinctiveness of their capabilities, and the ready supply of talent, will be in a much better position to reinvent themselves and jump into the next S curve with relative ease. And those that aren't able to respond are likely to see a stall in growth and possibly their demise. When I'm talking with clients right now, one of the biggest topics we end up talking about is reinvention and how they need to continually be doing that and just weave that into everything that they're doing on a daily basis. Because change is here, change is happening, it's happening at a rapid pace. And only the businesses and indeed the roles and team members that are going to survive are those that can move with those times, embrace that change, see it as an opportunity, actually gets excited about it because we have this time for rebirth and renewal. It's now happening on a pretty constant basis. Things are flourishing and changing and dying, just like in nature, right? On a daily basis, something within nature ceases to exist and something begins to thrive. So as we look to the correlation between nature and business, we just see this reinvention happening all the time in the way that nature is continually evolving and changing. So my invitation to you this week is to think about this really important time astrologically and in terms of the energy that's going on in the universe right now. What does your business need to do to reinvent? What do you need to relinquish? What do you need to start doing? What do you need to stop doing in order to move forward with more ease and fluidity into the future? I think this is a time of massive change throughout the world. And I think there's a load of great opportunities for clients for business, but we just need to be open to it and have an expansive mind and just look at the opportunities that might be there. Because I believe that we're on a kind of cliff face right now. And what has existed in the past is beginning to fall away. We're going to see a massive reinvention throughout the world. And the question is, what position are you going to be in to embrace that? So until next week, have a great time. Bye-bye.